So what's the country thinking right now? I got to go to our favorite pollster.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
You know, I'm sitting here looking at my phone because news just is coming in from Lifespan, you know, the hospital, Rhode Island Hospital Group et al. They are opposing the proposed acquisition of Care New England by Partners Healthcare, Brigham Women's and Mass General and that whole group. When have we covered that? Yesterday. And the CEO of Care New England sat here and told us that, hey, listen, Lifespan's been at the table in three-way discussions and everything is hunky-dory, and this merger acquisition between Care New England and Partners in Massachusetts is just part of what could be a three-way organizational change. And then Lifespan comes down with this. So it just came to our phones before taping the broadcast. I wanted to follow up on it in case you follow the show day to day, and if you do, thank you very much. We'll follow up tomorrow with a more in-depth response. Interesting thing is, I record the television show before I do the live radio show in the afternoon, so we may just be able to get some follow-up and read the tea leaves on that this afternoon, meaning before you saw the show, meaning tomorrow. You got all that? Anyway, Joe Fleming is here. He's going to talk to us about the pulse of the people. That's what he always talks to us about. I have to tell you, the Democrats are all of a sudden, like in the last 48 hours, like rampant impeachment conversation. I'm trying to figure out why in God's name they would be doing that. We'll Joe's take on it. In the meantime, let me cover a couple of things that I think are important. By the way, welcome in. Great to have you aboard. The Providence schools are a real dilemma for the state of Rhode Island, and this headline, while reportedly accurate and seemingly true, I don't buy. Not that it was written poorly, I just don't think that Mayor Lorza is all supportive of this whole thing. Here was Eyewitness News coverage of this new thought on the Providence schools yesterday.
We've decided it's time.
Alongside Mayor Jorge Elorza, Governor Gina Raimondo explained why the comprehensive review of the Providence Public School District is happening now.
The status quo isn't working. The system isn't working. The RICAS scores that came out in December were yet again a wake-up call. And really, it's a call to action to every single one of us.
The governor said the review has been recommended by incoming Education Commissioner Angelica Infante Green, who officially starts her role next week. With that position transitioning, an outgoing superintendent in Providence, and the RICAS scores, Governor Raimondo and Mayor Elorza agreed the timing is right.
There's a moment right now that we want to take advantage of.
The review is expected to take place over the next several weeks. The governor was asked if this means a state takeover of the Providence school system could happen at some point down the road. She says it's too soon to say exactly what this will lead to.
We don't have a predetermined outcome, and that's why we're beginning by listening.
And the mayor said he would only be open to a state takeover if it was a collaborative effort, not something imposed from the top down on the city.
Every kid in every zip code in every neighborhood in Providence, every kid deserves a chance to go to a high-quality, flourishing public school, and this is a first step.
And that's absolutely true, and I support the governor's intention here, especially with a new commissioner coming in to, work on a lot of the English language efforts here, the EL, the ESL, all of that kind of thing. That's her specialty. Believe me, the new commissioner, who is destined to start momentarily, is eyeballing the city of Providence. This notion that Elorza would go along with the state takeover if it was cooperative, makes sense, because the mayor is the ultimate authority on the schools, which is the governing problem in the city of Providence. Now, some mayors have hands off after they've appointed a superintendent and a handful of school committee members, because that's how it works in Providence. Unlike in your town where maybe you elect your school committee members and they choose a superintendent, the mayor has assumed control since 1980 based on the charter. And it all depends really on the hands-on and or skill set of the mayor. This mayor has got like OCD when it comes to his authority there. And I think the evidence is supported by the president of the teachers union, who talked to me on the radio about it yesterday.
I find it interesting, and I don't know of any other district, and I've been around for 25 years, and I speak to many people in the state and across the nation, in fact, and I don't know of any other district whereby any person who's hired that is a non-union employee has to have their final interview or a final conversation with the mayor rather than with the superintendent of schools.
I don't have any doubt why Chris Marr, the superintendent, amongst other reasons, is leaving, and why the superintendent prior left after a short stint, and prior, because you have to have autonomy. If you're interviewing people for gigs and you've got an initiative you're taking over, and then you've got to say, all right, but you know what, you got to go through it with the mayor too, it just strips down your ability to be able to take charge and manage. So amongst the things I hope will turn out in this entire review is not only the governance problem that I think exists in terms of how they set it up in the city of Providence, but the execution of this specific mayor in micromanaging the situation. It'll be fascinating. By the way, Mary Beth Calabro will be on with us, I believe, on the Friday show this week, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, the big story about General Assembly and your local towns is the Evergreen, and they hate this Evergreen contract bill. I think is overused. Evergreen is a term that's kind of been coined here by the Providence Journal. It's continuing contracts. It's perpetual contracts. It means, very simply, if say a teacher contract expires, all the terms and conditions stay intact until such time as a new agreement has been made. Now, the deal 2 years ago is different from the deal this year. The problem is nobody in the General Assembly can articulate the difference very well. I had a little conversation with Bob Walsh, the executive director of the Teachers Union, the NEA, here last week, a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of gobbledygook.
What we'd want to do in negotiations is get a deal, and deal usually involves raises or other concessions if there's literally no money on the table. The simple way for management to push the issue in the horrible budget situation you just outlined. But remember, communities have to budget exactly the school budget they had the prior year plus $1 at least every year. So there's a maintenance of effort requirement under the law already. So you're working with a similar.
Fixed costs put pressure on
that.
Right,
and other fixed costs can put pressure on that. Usually there are enough teacher retirements in any given year in every given system.
I got 30 seconds, unfortunately.
That there's a savings from replacement, new teachers replacing those teachers that retire. All that said, the poison pill that management already has is say, we're cutting program, we're cutting staff, we're cutting this, and that's how we're going to save the money unless you come to the table and deal with us.
So you think that's the answer?
No, I think that's how you get the pressure to get a deal.
The mayors don't want that. The superintendents don't want that. They don't want to put a gun to the teacher's head and say, we're going to fire you. Do the teachers want that? Mayor Policina, amongst many mayors, opposed this. Forever was on the radio with me just 2 days ago.
Sent a stern letter out to my members of my General Assembly, my delegation, asking them to vote against it. And quite frankly, if they vote for it and I have to raise the taxes, I have no problem putting their names on the tax bill. I really believe in my heart, at least I'll speak for myself, I don't want to lay off anybody. I just want to be able to have fair negotiations at the table. And I say I'm speaking for the taxpayers. I just want to be able to sit down and basically not sit down with my hands tied behind my back and a blindfold on, because that's what this will do to us. And it's really going to hurt the taxpayers.
Former educator before he was a pollster, Joe Fleming. I rely on Joe on a lot of historical discussion on this stuff. What is your take on this? By the way, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
What's your take on
Well,
this?
my take is obviously the mayors had very little impact with the House of Representatives yesterday because every Democrat but one voted.
2 in a row. The overtime,
Right.
the firefighter overtime bill, which
Correct.
a lot of them opposed as well. So
Right.
they're on the heels right now.
Exactly, and it's going to the Senate. My guess is it'll pass the Senate. The question is the governor. That's where the mayors had a big impact 2 years ago when the same bill, slightly different, passed. They convinced the governor to veto it. The question is, has the bill changed enough that the governor will sign it this time, or could the mayors put a full court press on again?
They put a full court press saying that they wouldn't support her for re-election.
Right, the re-election's not there.
So the
Right.
timing is everything in this business.
Yeah, there's no question. I'm sure 2 years ago it was a political decision for her. She knew she didn't have a lot of union support anyway because of the pensions years ago, and I think she felt by vetoing it, she might get a lot more independent votes. Well, the results show she won with a majority of the votes this time.
It's funny.
But,
You and I were chatting about this prior to our taping, and you said, well, the real key here is, what is the actual difference between that which was written 2 years ago and that which
Right.
is written this year?
I don't know.
You can look at it,
Yep.
and I have, and I can tell you that everybody in play here Tim Duffy, School Committees Association, the mayors, other reps, all either have something different to say about it or they're confused by the language. And its sponsor was on with Matt Allen on WPRO as I was driving in today, and she was not clear on that which is exactly perpetual,
Right.
or subject to change in non-binding arbitration. There's salaries, there's benefits,
Right.
there's working conditions, say classroom size,
Correct.
that kind of thing. Nobody seems to know.
No.
And Bob Walsh said, listen, we got the tools, they got to budget the money anyway, and if they don't like it, they can lay people off. Who wants that as an alternative?
I would think if the Senate passes the bill, the governor and her staff's going to have to really look at this with a fine-tooth comb and really decide what impact it's going to have on the city and towns, whether she signs the bill or vetoes the bill at that point. Because up to this point, as you said, no one has a clear picture of this bill.
You think it's a legacy issue for her? I don't know. Do you think the general public is as keyed in on this stuff as the municipal leadership and the
No.
talking heads are?
No, I don't think so. Not at this point, where in springtime, they're not zeroing in on this bill. Unless they see a big change in their tax bill, then they may zero in on it.
Oh, they always react after they see a big change in their tax bill. But then again, we have a cap of 4% from
Right.
one year to the next. So all we do is bleed out the debt side
Correct.
and the liability side.
Right.
Until this whole thing explodes
Right.
one day.
And a lot of times these issues do not have a big impact on the state representative or the state senator because they're still well liked in their own district. They're just one person. They're not the General Assembly.
I hate it when Fleming is right, and he's right. He's right about all of that. All right, we come back. I want to figure out the pulse of the people here and beyond. Stay with us. Not good. All right. Headlines are interesting here, Mr. Fleming, because I don't know if you sense the same thing, but we were post-Mueller. What day is today? Today is Wednesday. When did the report come out?
Last Thursday.
Last Thursday. So reactions Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You know, you had some Democrats saying, "This is our moment to impeach," but Nancy Pelosi has had the brakes on. I think even David Cicilline here locally has had the brakes on. But unless I've missed something, my pretty close scrutiny of at least cable news coverage over the last 2 days. It seems like all of a sudden, because Trump went Twitter crazy, they think they got him on the run, and they're moving toward a much more verbose impeachment conversation. Don't give me the analysis yet. Are you hearing the same thing I'm hearing?
I'm hearing a lot of more impeachment talk
in the last 2 days.
Right.
Okay, all right.
But,
so I was wondering if I had lost my mind.
But who is it coming from? That's the big question. I think a lot of the impeachment talk is coming from people and presidential candidates who are very progressive, who are trying to do what Donald Trump did, play to their base. Their base of progressive Democrats want to see Donald Trump impeached. However, Nancy Pelosi is acting a lot differently because she realized impeachment's a political issue and that she could possibly get him impeached in the House, but he's not going to be convicted in the Senate. And what happened to Bill Clinton after he was impeached and went to the Senate and did not get convicted?
He was reelected.
And his numbers went skyrocketing. So I think what Nancy Pelosi is going to do is try to calm it down over the next week or two and do investigations over the next year on Donald Trump to keep him off base. But I'll be shocked if there's impeachment proceedings moving forward, unless something else comes up.
The polling data out there is hurting Donald Trump right now. His,
Right.
his unfavorability rating is as high as it's been. His favorability rating is not good. He's 5 points down on that poll and others. But in addition, the impeachment question is still a majority no.
Right.
Right?
At this point, yes. I think
How is that ever going to change? And doesn't that have to change to have fertile ground for an impeachment process to have legs?
Yes. They would have to have more evidence. I mean, they want to see the retracted report to see what else is in it. It's not a lot. It's like 8% of the report. But they want to see that, see if there's any other evidence in there they can use. Then they have to have hearings. You know, this whole procedure takes 12 months, 18 months. The election will be over before they even get to impeachment. But I think at this point, they don't have the evidence.
It's really fascinating. You know, political guys like you, pollsters and everything else, are important in this exercise. if you think that the pulse of the people is a mandatory component for evaluation, if you think it's all principle, and you believe that the Mueller report has clearly indicated that there was minimally obstruction of justice, possibly too much footloose and fancy-free with the Russians, if you're a heck bent on that, you can go ahead and with your hair on fire, try to bring an impeachment thing together. But if you're trying to gauge public opinion, you have to give them something to change the opinion. You have to make sure that, and that feels like, it feels to me kind of a corruption of the Founding Fathers' high crimes and misdemeanors intent. What do you think?
Well, keep this in mind. Let's go back probably a little before your time, Richard Nixon and his impeachment.
Listen, I watched his resignation. Okay. I was 9, but
before they went to impeachment, what do they have? Hearings in the Senate with Sam Irvings from North Carolina. That's where all the information came out. Then they went to impeachment. And I think that's what they're going to try to do here. They're not going to just go right to impeachment, because you're right, with the Founding Fathers, that's not something you want to use all the time. I think Nancy Pelosi is going to push for hearings and investigations. Then if they find something, they may move forward. But I don't think they have enough right now.
But then you got the polling that really matters, which is election pre-polling. If they're not done by the summer with this stuff, and this bleeds into the fall and into the early season of election 2020, I think it's going to pollute. It's going to pollute the mindset of America's voters, don't you?
Well, I think what's going to happen is the longer this drags on, people on both sides are going to become more firm in their stance. And there's that small group in the middle that's going to really decide this election. And this could have a negative impact on them or a positive impact. We don't know.
Does his Twitter behavior, there's a boomerang effect to that as well, isn't there, at some point?
I think the other day, I think it was like 50 tweets. Some very high number. I think people after a while are going to start questioning what's going on. And again, those who love Donald Trump, they don't care. Those who hate Donald Trump, they don't care. It's that small group in the middle that everyone has to play to.
How big is that base? How big is that base? That base is 35%?
35 to 40% Donald Trump's base at this point.
And it never moves.
Doesn't move at all, and he keeps playing to his base. That's why it never moves. That's why Bill Weld running against him in a Republican primary, Republicans love him. 90% have a favorable opinion of Donald Trump. And that's going to hurt Bill Weld in the primary.
But if Trump continues to play act through this thing, for some reason, I mean, he just loves the action. It seems to me like he's almost embracing this situation. Does a guy like, look, Bill Weld has got all the tools. If he's just jerking around nonchalantly and doesn't raise any money, he's wasting all our time. But if he goes out there and raises $20 million,
right,
and puts an organization together, he is very formidable as a guy that looks sane and still can move the conservative needle.
Well, he might be able to. The thing is, some of the primaries are closed primaries where only Republicans can vote. Some allow independents in. I mean, the closed primaries, all the polling data I've seen, 90% of the people love Donald Trump or Republicans.
Unpenetrable?
I think those are.
Even with impeachment?
Well, if more evidence is found and it moves on, it may change the needle some.
But again, impeachment is an indictment. Impeachment doesn't mean trial.
Correct.
The Senate just holds firm. It doesn't move that 90% needle at all.
I don't think it will, because I mean the Senate will. I cannot see the Senate convicting him. I can even see a couple of Democrats probably who are in very red states going the other way because it could cost them their Senate seat.
It is a little, you want to take a shower-ish over this whole thing, that a calculation over whether the presidency is tampered with has much to do with the way polls are moving. That shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
No, but again, as we all said, the poll's just a snapshot, and that's how people are viewing things right now, on what they're getting from the Washington every day. I mean, you watch CNN, Fox.
Trump's engaging polls, see if we can move. If Trump's negative gets to a certain number, all right, we can pull the trigger. It's goopy. It doesn't make me feel like we're honoring the Constitution, and despite the player, the formidability of the president.
From what I'm gathering, and Nancy Pelosi does not want to do that. She wants to just do investigation, not pull the trigger on impeachment at all. And I don't think she's looking at poll numbers. She's looking at reality. She's been around long enough. She knows what's going on. And I think she's trying to really act in a way that will investigate Donald Trump, but we need to find more things if we're going to go forward with this.
All right, when we come back, you could field a football team, offense and defense right now with the number of people running for president. We'll be right back. So he reportedly is going to announce in a video tomorrow that he's running for the presidency. So I don't know what's taken him so long. Do you think that the drag on this has helped him or hurt him?
I don't think it's hurt him at this point because there's so many Democrats out there. No Democrat has been able to build any momentum. Matter of fact, in all the polling data I've ever seen, Joe Biden's in first place, and he hasn't even announced. So I think he's short on the campaign a little bit. He dealt with the negative issue early on in the campaign about us touching people, and now I think he's ready to get going.
Bernie's solid.
Yep.
Bernie seems like the guy who could pull off a primary and never beat Donald Trump.
I would tend to agree with you. The question is, can Bernie pull off a primary this year? There's an awful lot of progressives in the race. They're going to cut into Bernie's vote. You know, Elizabeth Warren, Harris, they're going to take votes away from Bernie as time goes on.
Warren's proposal on eliminating college debt is going to get a lot of people to pay attention.
Right.
There's more holes in it than Swiss cheese.
But she's playing to a base stand. She's going to the progressive wing of the party. There's so many progressives running. She's trying to push to the forefront. So the progressives rally around her instead of other.
What about Mayor Pete? We got a headline here. I saw New Hampshire numbers the other day. It's Biden and Bernie on top, but this guy now is a clear and separate third place.
Okay, keep this in mind. 4 years ago, there were 17 Republicans running. But every 2 or 3 weeks, a different Republican moved to the top, and then they fell back down. When Senator Harris announced, she moved up to third place. Now Mayor Pete moved up. The question is, in 2 or 3 weeks, can he maintain that, or is he going to drop back down in the pack? It's still way early. People have not really focused in that much yet. But he is doing things that people did not expect at this point.
People like him.
Yes, he's very likable.
I like him.
Right.
And unfortunately, it seems that we elect presidents wholly on personal dynamics.
Yes, people like them, but again, he's 37 years old. People may think he's too young at this point. Remains to be seen. But I mean, I want to see if he's still up at these numbers 3 or 4 weeks or a month from now.
Will Democrats be smart enough to find a candidate that can beat Donald Trump or someone that serves their ideological purpose? And I don't think those two things are the same.
No, they're not. I think the Democrats need to find somebody that can beat Donald Trump. They need to find a candidate that can win Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Pennsylvania, states that the Democrats lost last time.
That seems to be Biden to me.
Joe Biden, or somebody like Joe Biden in my mind, who appeals to the white middle-class worker, where Donald Trump did very well last time. I think somebody in the Biden thing can work. Somebody way to the left, I think Donald Trump's going to have a field day with them. They can't win those states. They probably can't win Virginia, can't win Florida. So a lot of states that are like 2% either way, my guess would go towards Donald Trump, especially if the economy stays well.
It's going to be a senior citizen election if that's the case.
Yes.
We have plenty of time to worry about that. Good analysis, Joe. Thank you very much. Final word when we come back. So tomorrow night we will take a look at this continuing contract thing that the Senate is now going to embark on, and the governor will have to decide to veto. It is complicated. We will talk to a Republican that voted for it in the House, the only one. Okay, we'll talk to you on the radio at 3 until 6 tomorrow on WPRO as well. You have a great night.